Ducky's NCIS Origins Return answered another big Gibbs question and gave me a theory on another one. There's something almost mythic about the way stories choose to reveal their truths. Not all at once, not in a neat confession, but in fragments. A look, a line, a memory that feels heavier than it should. That's why Ducky's return in NCIS Origins didn't just feel like a cameo. It felt like a key turning in a long, locked door. For years, Leroy Jethro Gibbs has existed as a man shaped by silence. The rules, the stoicism, the distant gaze, these weren't quirks. They were armor. And like all armor, they hinted at the wounds beneath. We've known pieces of his story, of course. Loss, betrayal, war. But Origins has been carefully peeling back the layers, and with Ducky stepping back into the narrative, something shifted. Because Ducky doesn't just remember Gibbs, he understands him. And in that understanding, the show quietly answered one of the biggest lingering questions about Gibbs. When did he become the man we know? The answer, surprisingly, isn't a single moment. It's a process. Ducky's reappearance framed Gibbs not as a finished product, but as someone still in transition. There was a softness to him, subtle, easy to miss, but undeniable. He listened more than he spoke. He hesitated before making calls that older Gibbs would have executed without blinking. It wasn't weakness. It was humanity, still intact. Ducky, in his characteristic way, didn't confront this directly. Instead, he told stories. About cases, about choices, about the cost of carrying too much alone. And through those stories, we see something remarkable. Gibbs is still deciding who he will become. That's the answer the episode gave us. Gibbs didn't become Gibbs overnight. Not after tragedy, not after war, not even after joining NCIS. He learned it. Piece by piece. Rule by rule. Scar by scar. And Ducky was there earlier than we thought, not just as a colleague, but as a quiet influence. A moral anchor. Someone who reminded Gibbs, even subtly, that there was another way to exist beyond pure survival. But here's where it gets interesting. Because while the episode answers that question, it opens another. What if Gibbs didn't just learn his rules from experience? What if he built them to replace something he lost? There's a moment, small, almost throwaway, where Ducky pauses mid-sentence, watching Gibbs. Not analyzing him as a doctor would, but studying him as a friend might. There's recognition there, but also concern. It's the kind of look that suggests Ducky knows something we don't. And it got me thinking. We've always assumed Gibbs's rules were born from discipline and necessity. A Marine's mindset translated into investigative work. But what if they were something more personal, something more emotional? What if they were a response to guilt? Consider this. Early Gibbs, as shown in Origins, isn't reckless. But he's not yet rigid. He questions. He improvises. He even bends, occasionally, when the situation calls for it. That flexibility is almost completely gone in the Gibbs we meet later. Why? People don't usually become more rigid over time unless something forces them to. A mistake. A loss. A moment that redefines everything. What if there's still a missing piece in Gibbs' timeline? A case or decision so devastating that it pushed him to codify his life into rules. Not just guidelines, but absolutes. Lines he would never cross again, because crossing them once cost too much. Ducky's presence in this episode hints at that possibility. Because he doesn't treat Gibbs like someone broken. He treats him like someone on the brink of breaking. There's also the matter of trust. Ducky clearly trusts Gibbs, even in this earlier version. But it's not the unwavering, implicit trust we see later. It's cautious, observant, as if Ducky is still deciding whether Gibbs will become the man he hopes he will. That's fascinating, because it suggests that Gibbs' reputation, the legendary agent, the man of rules, wasn't inevitable. It was earned. And maybe, just maybe, it was forged in a moment we haven't seen yet. Here's the theory that's been forming in my mind since watching the episode. There's a pivotal case in Gibbs' early career, one that hasn't been shown yet, that involves a choice. A choice where Gibbs follows instinct instead of principle. And that choice leads to consequences he can't undo. Not just professional consequences, personal ones. The kind that stay with you. The kind that echo. And in the aftermath, Gibbs does something drastic. He creates rules. Not as a way to control others, but as a way to control himself. To ensure he never makes that kind of mistake again. If that's true, it reframes everything. It means Gibbs' rules aren't just about discipline. They're about regret. They're a map of his past failures, rewritten as instructions for the future. And Ducky, having seen both sides of that transformation, becomes the only person who truly understands what those rules cost him. That would explain the weight behind their interactions, the unspoken history, the way Ducky doesn't challenge Gibbs' rules outright, but occasionally nudges him to remember the humanity behind them. What NCIS Origins is doing so brilliantly is resisting the urge to simplify Gibbs. He isn't just the stoic leader. He isn't just the grieving widower. He's a man in motion. A man being shaped, not just by what happens to him, but by how he chooses to respond. Ducky's return underscores that beautifully. Because in a show filled with investigations and revelations, the most compelling mystery isn't a case. It's a person. And we're still uncovering him, piece by piece, memory by memory, rule by rule. If the episode answered when Gibbs started becoming who he is, then the next big question is why he finished becoming him. And if my theory holds, the answer won't be clean. It won't be heroic. It'll be painful. Which, in a way, makes it perfect. Because the most enduring characters aren't the ones who are born strong. They're the ones who become strong after breaking first. The thing about breaking points is that they rarely announce themselves. They don't arrive with dramatic music or clear choices labeled right and wrong. More often, they slip in quietly, disguised as routine, buried inside decisions that feel small in the moment. A call made too quickly. A risk taken because it might save someone. A hesitation that lasts half a second too long. If my theory is right, then somewhere ahead in NCIS Origins, Gibbs is going to face one of those moments. And he's going to get it wrong. Not because he's careless, not because he doesn't care, but because he still believes he can carry the weight of judgment on his own. That's the version of Gibbs we're seeing right now, the one who hasn't yet learned the cost of isolation. He operates like someone who trusts his instincts above all else, someone who believes that if he just thinks hard enough, reacts fast enough, he can outmaneuver consequences. But instinct, as powerful as it is, has limits, and consequences don't negotiate. Ducky knows that. That's what makes his presence so important, not just narratively, but emotionally. He represents perspective, time. The understanding that no one, not even someone like Gibbs, is immune to mistakes that linger. There's a quiet tension in the way Ducky interacts with him, like he's watching a storm form on the horizon. He doesn't try to stop it, because maybe he knows he can't, but he does something just as important. He witnesses it. And sometimes, being seen is what makes a moment stick. Imagine this. A case that starts like any other. A suspect who doesn't quite fit. Evidence that points in two directions. A partner or team member who suggests caution, maybe even disagrees with Gibbs' read of the situation. And Gibbs, young, sharp, still proving himself, pushes forward anyway. Because he's sure that he's right. Sure that waiting will cost them. Sure that action is better than doubt. It's a very Gibbs thing to do. Even later in his career, that instinct never fully disappears. But in the version we know, it's tempered by rules. Lines he refuses to cross, even when everything in him is screaming to. Right now, though, those lines are still being drawn. So he makes the call. And for a moment, it works. That's the cruelest part of mistakes like this. They often almost succeed. Just enough to reinforce the belief that the choice was justified. But then something shifts. A detail overlooked. A variable misread. A person, innocent, guilty, or somewhere in between, caught in the fallout. And suddenly, the cost becomes clear. I don't think this moment will be loud. I don't think it'll be framed as a grand tragedy with immediate emotional release. I think it'll be quiet. A body on the floor. A look from someone who trusted him. Maybe even a moment where Gibbs himself doesn't fully react. Not yet. Where he goes still, internalizing what just happened in a way that doesn't surface until much later. Because that's how real transformation works. It doesn't explode. It settles. And that's where the rules begin. Not as a system, not as a philosophy, but as a coping mechanism. Rule 1 isn't just about safety. Rule 3 isn't just about trust. Each one, if you look closely, feels like a response to something that already happened. A correction. A boundary drawn in the aftermath of crossing one that shouldn't have been crossed. So what if this unseen case, this pivotal moment, is the origin of more than one rule? What if it's the foundation? It would explain why Gibbs holds on to them so tightly later in life. Why breaking a rule isn't just a tactical decision. It's personal. It's emotional. It's something he avoids unless absolutely necessary. And even then, it costs him. Because every rule is a reminder. Not of what to do, but of what not to repeat. And where does Ducky fit into all of this? That's the part that keeps pulling at me. Because if Gibbs builds his rules out of guilt, then Ducky becomes the only person who knows what existed before those rules. The only one who remembers the man who hadn't yet hardened. And maybe that's why their dynamic feels so layered, even in later timelines. Ducky doesn't just respect Gibbs, he understands him in a way that no one else quite does. He's seen the transition. He's watched the armor being built. And he knows exactly what it's protecting. There's a kind of tragedy in that. Not a dramatic, sweeping tragedy, but a quiet one. The kind where growth comes at a cost. Where becoming stronger also means becoming more distant. Where survival requires letting go of parts of yourself you can't afford to carry anymore. But here's where I think NCIS Origins might surprise us. Because while it's easy to frame this transformation as purely negative, as the loss of softness, of openness, I don't think the show is going that route. I think it's going to show us something more complicated. What if the rules don't just limit Gibbs? What if they also save him? Think about it. Without structure, without boundaries, someone like Gibbs could easily spiral. The weight of loss, the pressure of the job, the constant exposure to the worst parts of humanity. It's a lot for anyone to carry. The rules give him a framework, a way to navigate chaos without being consumed by it. So yes, they're born from pain, but they also become a form of stability, a way forward. And maybe that's what Ducky sees. Not just the damage, but the resilience. Not just the cost, but the survival. Which brings us back to that look, the one Ducky gives Gibbs in this episode. It isn't just concern. It isn't just recognition. It's something more layered than that. It's the look of someone who knows what's coming and hopes, somehow, that the person in front of them will make it through. Because in the end, that's the real story being told here. Not just how Gibbs became the man we know, but whether he had to become that man in the first place. And if there was ever another version of him, one that might have turned out differently, if just one moment had gone another way. That's the question that lingers now. The one Origins hasn't answered yet. The one that makes every decision, every hesitation, every instinct feel heavier. Because somewhere ahead, there's a choice waiting. And this time, we'll be watching when it happens.